Coming up on Avant, Technology Insights with Ken Presti.
You don't have to be an expert in every single one of these, but you got to know a little bit about all of these different things so you can take your customer on the whole journey and help them avoid the different landmines that exist out there.
As your company moves to the cloud, you've got to rethink your approach to security, governance, processes, and of course, the underlying WAN infrastructure responsible for getting all those bits and bytes to the right places. Today, we're looking at technology as seen through the lens of the Aryaka Networks 2020 Global State of the WAN Report. Are enterprise decision makers placing enough focus on network performance in the midst of latency-sensitive and bandwidth-hungry SaaS applications, or is that more likely to slip through the cracks nowadays? Stay tuned. Answers to that question and more are coming up shortly. Welcome to Avant Technology Insights. I'm your host, Ken Presti, Research Vice President of Avant Research and Analytics. The link between solving business challenges and cutting-edge technologies has become tighter and more complex than ever before. In this podcast series from Avant Research and Analytics, we help enterprise decision makers sort through the business case, the value, the challenges, and ultimately the bottom line of technology adoption. So listen to us at your desktop, take us in the car, tune in from the commuter train, or download us at the gate. You'll find us on Apple, Spotify, and Google, as well as at www.goavant.net/podcast. My guest today is from Aryaka Networks, a prominent SD-WAN provider, or to put it another way, a managed next-gen WAN provider. The company has recently released its Aryaka Global State of the WAN Report for 2020, leveraging a survey of about 1,000 IT professionals who shared their WAN-related challenges, priorities, and plans for this year and beyond. The report covers a diverse set of services, application performance, complexity, skills gaps, and more. Please welcome Aryaka's Senior Vice President of Worldwide Channels, Olen Scott. Olen, I want to thank you very much for being on the show. I know you and your team over at Aryaka have been doing a lot of work on a WAN report that has come out very recently. Give me a little bit of color around that, if you don't mind. How did that report come to be? And what's the purpose of it, and how is it designed?
Sure, Ken. Thank you. So Aryaka does an annual State of the WAN survey. We call it the Global State of the WAN. And we did just publish our 2020 report. And effectively, the State of the WAN survey is done. The reason we do this is to really inform our product development decision making. So in our space, we spend, millions of dollars on product development and staying ahead of the curve, right? Skate where the puck will be, so to speak. So before we undertake those large lifts and all of that development work, we go out on an annual basis and we poll literally thousands of IT decision makers. And this is everything from the network managers and network admin up to and including many CIOs and vice presidents of IT and information security. And we ask them a litany of questions, dozens and dozens of categories and questions from WAN application performance and InfoSec. And this year we had 1,000 respondents across multiple industry segments. So it's very statistically relevant information, both for an IT user and also a trusted advisor to consume.
So it sounds like you started out with something that was about product planning, and you ended up with a piece of market research and kind of thought, hey, a lot of people would be interested in this sort of thing. We should make it known to our friends and allies.
That is exactly right. Yeah, that's a great synthesis.
Excellent, because this sort of thing is near and dear to my heart. We've got a lot of reports that we're working on and things of that nature. And one of the things that really comes to my mind when I do this kind of market research is there's always a couple of things that jump out at you as you start to collect that data and look at it and start to look at it in the context of what it means from a kind of a point-to-point sort of aspect. Was there anything in particular that jumped out at you in terms of, I'm going to scratch my head on this one. This surprises me, or this really validates what we've always known?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll tell you, it wasn't that I scratched my head so much as I probably did a cartwheel and thought, finally. But this year's State of the WAN survey, it did surprise us very much because really for the first time ever, price or cost of the network of the WAN fell completely off the list of customer and decision maker and IT influencer top three priorities, right? So we ask our community of users, what are your top three WAN challenges, right? Are your top three WAN priorities? And invariably, no, really I should say challenges, invariably the cost of the WAN has been in the top three. And in fact, last year in 2019, it was number one, right? With 40% of the respondents rating that as the top challenge. And in 2020, it completely disappeared from the top five. And the top three were, the first was the complexity of networks, which if you think about, I won't go down a foxhole here because I could opine on this for a long time. But when you think about the proliferation of cloud and cloud compute and multi-cloud environments and how many clouds and different SaaS platforms that the average enterprise company is now trying to integrate into its communication fabric, it really shouldn't be surprising that complexity and by the way, the hockey stick of adoption of that kind of stuff, it shouldn't be that big of a surprise that complexity quickly became the number one priority or challenge of IT decision makers. And the second two, no surprise, both had to do with application performance.
What do you think was the cause of the cost of the network slipping off of the top five like that? That seems like an abrupt drop.
Yeah, it was a very abrupt drop. I think that this is very anecdotal, Ken. I should say that this is not a result of survey information. This is more, as you asked, what I think, right?
Sure, that's okay.
I think that people are seeing certain economic benefit by moving to SD-WAN. They're seeing certain economic benefit by moving to cloud compute, right? So I think if you look at the delivery of applications, because that's the only reason that the network exists, I think that the delivery of applications has had other cost takeout areas that benefits, or other cost takeout benefits that the business enjoys, so that delivering that across the lowest cost per widget WAN infrastructure fabric is not really a necessity. I think businesses are looking much more at the cost of IT in a more macro environment versus the cost of my apps plus the cost of my network plus the cost of security. And by the way, that's the right thing. You should not be looking at those little islands of automation or those things in microcosms. They should be looked at as a whole. So I suspect that has a lot to do with a de-emphasis of what my WAN costs and an increased emphasis on what my WAN provides from an application delivery perspective.
Okay, so if I'm getting that correctly, it sounds like what you're saying is it comes down to the overall cost of the architecture combined with the applications, the total value proposition. And it sounds like you're seeing more of an emphasis on that overall cost as opposed to the segments within it. Is that correct?
I think that is correct. Yeah, I think that is correct. And also, I think that businesses will always look at the cost of that overall. Like, everyone's always going to want value. That's never going to go away. But increasingly, I'd be remiss not to say, in addition to looking at the costs as a whole, businesses are also generally seeing increased budgets in this area. If you take a step back and you look at the businesses that are thriving, right, most of them are leveraging technology, right, whether it's business intelligence or IoT. They're leveraging it as a strategic differentiator versus a necessary evil or cost of doing business. I don't know, I want to date myself, right? But for decades, we would talk about, when will companies begin to stop thinking of IT infrastructure or IT in general as a necessary evil and more as a strategic differentiator. And at this point, I think that's become more the norm than the exception.
So are people spending a lot of, and by people, I'm referring to the enterprise decision makers, are they for the most part focusing on the network in the way that you think they should? Or is the network aspect kind of dragged behind the applications, the cool new stuff, the AI and all these other things that are coming down the pike? How does that impact how you approach that overall value proposition?
This is almost for choreograph. People would think I planted that question. I'm so happy that you asked it. I'm so
No,
happy that you asked it.
it's a good question. No, it wasn't choreographed,
It is,
but
yeah, no, I love it. I'm grinning because it's a softball. It has been my experience that it does trail the application, and it is far too often, a majority of the time, in fact, I would say it is an afterthought, right? People fail to contemplate the appropriate infrastructure to support the applications. I have a couple of dear friends in my neighborhood that work for large global consulting firms that I won't name because it wouldn't be fair to those global consulting firms. But their names, right? They're the big brands that any multinational firm would go out and hire to validate decision making, and they undertake journey to cloud transformations that cost hundreds of millions of dollars. And I joked to them and said, how is it that you will sell somebody a $200 million journey to cloud and fail to contemplate the right WAN, which might cost, the difference between $100,000 a month or $120,000 a month? Why would you make that mistake? And he said, I got to be honest, Olen, we just don't ever stop to think that passing ones and zeros from point A to point B is going to be the real issue. No one ever thinks that's going to be what's going to turn this whole thing on its ear. And yet 98%, I read this in a report somewhat recently, it's probably 4 months data now, it said 98% of cloud deployments experience some type of application performance issue. Isn't that amazing?
Because they lost track of the unloved half of the OSI stack.
Yeah, the plumbing. Yeah, it's right. The plumbing, right? Yeah, it's crazy. It's the part that compared to what you pay for the applications and the compute itself, it's a nit, right? It's a silly thing not to get right and to put some investment into, which is why, honestly, it's why the role of the trusted advisor, right, and the consultant has become so very, very, very relevant over the last, several years.
What is it that you ask of the trusted advisor at this point in time? So if I'm one of your trusted advisors and I'm probably looking primarily up the stack, but I certainly need that plumbing that you talked about a moment ago to make it all work. What do they need? What message do you want to give them? And what is it that they need to truly understand about how to drive this home to the enterprise decision maker so that they can see the value of it and know that this isn't just a sales tactic designed to build that bottom line on the invoice?
I'm going to do a gratuitous plug, but nobody says this better than Drew, right? Seriously, he says, train like a pro, right? You have to train like a pro. He says, you got to know a little about a lot. Like those comments really resonate with me because if you're a trusted advisor, right? If you're going to take people and lead them on this journey, you have to contemplate all aspects of this journey, right? I mean, the cloud transformation, there are a lot of aspects to that, right? You're changing your compute, which means it's going to affect your transport model. It's going to affect your security model. It's probably going to affect some of your governance and your internal company processes. So you don't have to be an expert in every single one of these, but you got to know a little bit about all of these different things so you can take your customer on the whole journey and help them avoid the different landmines that exist out there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I can see that. So your study, are you aiming it primarily at those trusted advisors? Are you aiming it at the enterprise decision makers? Who do you think is going to get the most use out of it?
Yeah, so it was not in high candor. It was not developed for our trusted advisor, for our partner community. But I think they would be remiss not to digest every single word of it because it consumes so beautifully. And it really, there's lots of graphics, lots of pictures, lots of data. And it's exactly that. It's just a little information on a whole. What it really is the synthesis. It's the conclusion, right? So it's a little bit of information based on a whole bunch of data across a wide array of application and WAN topics. So I think it's really perfect for the trusted advisor community to consume. But this was really built for IT decision makers and IT managers to see what their counterparts, right, are experiencing and what they're doing about it throughout the space. Where are my peers seeing challenges? Where are they investing money, and what kinds of solutions are they looking for?
Right. Now we rolled out our 612 report on SD-WAN late last year. I think you might have seen a copy of it at some point. And one of the things that we saw that kind of surprised me in the beginning, and then the more I dug into it, the more it made sense, is that we see SD-WAN in growth mode, but we also see MPLS in growth mode. Now they're in different customer types, in terms of scale and size and all that. But we saw both of them continuing to rise. How do you see that playing out over time? And what does your own survey disclose in that area?
Cloud compute continues to grow, right? And grow like crazy. And so compute in general, right, continues to grow at a pretty aggressive clip. And internet is not always the right underlay. I mean, it's inherently unreliable. And not everybody in North America appreciates that because we're pretty spoiled. We have a pretty robust internet infrastructure, and even it doesn't get it right all the time. So internet's a bit unreliable. And so most experts out there would say, listen, there are plenty of use cases where some type of private underlay is necessary as opposed to the internet. And candidly, a large percentage of the market thinks that the only other option is MPLS. It's either internet or it's MPLS, and there is no option C, which of course is where we come in. And I'm not here to do a commercial on that. So I think that's what drives some of the growth behind the MPLS. What will be really interesting to see between your last year's 612 and the next 612 that you publish will be the impact of what this global pandemic does on MPLS. I think it may well, this is again, not from the state of the WAN, but the world according to Olen, right? But my opinion is that it will accelerate. I've always believed that MPLS has a tail on it, that it's not going to last forever. Because it's
had a good long run. It's had at the very least.
Yeah. I remember when we started selling it instead of frame relay, right? And it's had a great run. And by the way, it's great for inter-office connectivity, but most applications no longer live at one of those offices, right? It's just not a great cloud infrastructure fabric. It's not really optimized because everything's hairpin. Everything takes an around the bout path to get to where the cloud application lives in an MPLS world. And if you look at this global pandemic, really, cloud compute could not have had a better commercial than a situation where the entire planet goes home to work in a span of 3 to 4 weeks, right? I mean, an MPLS network that connects all your offices when nobody's at the office doesn't do you a whole lot of good, right? So I think that companies will, I don't think it's going to change how things play out. I think it's going to accelerate how things play out. I think what would have been a good 3 to 5 year tail, or let's call it 5-year tail, probably gets shortened materially as a result of this pandemic as people create infrastructures that have to support the potential shift of knowledge workers from the office to the home on a moment's notice.
And not only that, I mean, we went through this once, but we're also talking about reprises of this particular pandemic and other things that can happen. So we're in a situation now where companies have to be able to respond to all this almost at a moment's notice without warning. And that's a tough thing to do under the best of circumstances. But by planning it out, at least they can get a little bit of a leg up on that.
Well, that's exactly right. There's no question that this just became another readiness box that is going to show up on every CIO's business continuity plan from now until forever, right? This is something you have to be able to plan for. You have to answer the question, what happens if there's a pandemic and everybody goes home? It's no longer an unreasonable scenario.
So tell me more about the key aspects of the report. Very often these kinds of things do one of two things. They either disprove something or they prove something that you've already known. Aside from those three things that you talked about, when we first started our conversation, what jumped out at you as some of the more pertinent returns that you received on that survey?
Underpinning all of this is the adoption of cloud compute. It talks about how many clouds or how many SaaS applications the average business is using. It talks about the complexity that injects into the WAN fabric, because it's about the state of the WAN, right? So it talks about the complexity of the WAN fabric. It talks about choosing the right middle mile, right, or the right transport, because even all internet's not created equal, right? Broadband is not the same as fiber, right? So it gets into a lot of, I'd say just about every aspect of the things that can affect a WAN, because there are so many different variables that can affect a WAN. And then it talks a lot about the different types of compute. I always call it cloud compute, but effectively, I mean, the sexy word is SaaS, right? It talks about, I mean, literally, let's see, 20, 34, 50% of, no, 46, 56, 70, 75% of businesses that reports in this report are using 10 or greater, of all the responses, are using 10 or greater SaaS applications. So think about that.
That's pretty compelling. Also,
Yeah.
I got to say, I always got to admire a man who can do math on the fly while in the middle of a podcast. The thing that most got to me as I was looking through this report is, if I'm an enterprise decision maker and I'm reading through this, we were talking earlier about how to use technology, how to use IT as a competitive differentiator. This is an excellent tool for getting a sense of what other people are doing, and then basically comparing it with what your own company is doing to see how well you are leveraging technology and if there are certain lessons that need to be learned along the way. What are you seeing in terms of the post effects of reading this report, in terms of the questions that they ask your people, their willingness to have the discussion in the first place, and their overall receptivity to the value proposition?
Well, we have, I want to disclose this so it's not giving us too much credit. We have been bombarded with requests to provide solutions that will better support collaboration and UCaaS solutions, right? That's probably been but I'm not entirely sure. I don't think it would be fair. I mean, so bombarded, Ken, for the last couple of months that there's little bandwidth to do much else. I would love to take credit. I would love to give credit to the State of the WAN survey for that, because the State of the WAN survey actually shows that the top SaaS applications for the global enterprise, if you look of the top six SaaS or cloud applications for the global enterprise, the UCaaS or collaboration platforms were 5 of them. Right? It was 8x8. It was OC 365, which is the productivity suite that includes Teams. It was Zoom. It was WebEx. Those were 4 of the top 6 applications being used globally by enterprises. And this report was published in January. So this was pre-COVID-19, right? So as much as I would love to sit here and say that this report caused people to go, oh, I'm going to go out there and do what my peers are doing, we clearly got a lot of help from, unforeseen circumstance with the pandemic.
So what does this open up? Okay, so you've got these collaborations and UCaaS applications that are driving demand on one level, especially in the midst of the pandemic and all that. So now you've got bandwidth, and now you've got, you've got bandwidth as a result of having to put these applications in, and now you've got more options because your network is better. Where do you see this growing? What do you think is going to be the next steps in terms of, okay, everybody's got Teams, everybody's got, their UCaaS and, a couple of other things for collaboration thrown in along the way. What grabs onto that tail and gets dragged along in a very positive way?
Most companies, the first workload, or the first, I don't even know if you call it a workload, but the first thing that was pushed to the cloud, and this is probably a half decade old now, was of course backup, right? Data storage was the very first thing that people moved off premise. And then when that worked, a lot of folks started going down the path of UCaaS, just because UCaaS was one that was really easy to justify because there was such enormous benefit from a cost standpoint, right? So people could fund improvements in the infrastructure via the takeout in the telephony. So UCaaS was a pretty quick mover. But now, companies, and I wouldn't even say that they're the bleeding edge ones, right? The companies are far down the path of moving all of their, Microsoft Dynamics sits in Azure, it's in the cloud. You see the entire O365 productivity suite. One of our single best use cases is the way SAP HANA, right? SAP HANA performs in a cloud environment when powered by Aryaka, right? So like on our website, if you were to go look at some of those use cases, you'll see these SAP HANA, which is these are enterprise resource packages, right? These are big ERP packages that were not really designed to work ideally in cloud environments. So it's where an SD-WAN or a private middle mile solution makes a ton of sense. Yeah, but we see companies moving. I mean, clearly there's still a long way to go, but we see companies that have 85, 90% of their applications in the cloud already. Not all of them, but some.
So this implies a hybrid environment in a lot of cases. So, I mean, sometimes by accident, sometimes by design. What do you see as any particular challenges or observations that you want to make relative to these types of environment where you've got one foot in the cloud and one foot in the data center? And maybe you want to get that foot out of the data center, or maybe you don't. But, is there anything in particular that jumps at you in terms of best practices or observations that people ought to know about?
I think the business need drives the application, right? So you have to use the application that best suits your enterprise business need. And it may be an old, monolithic application that's wasn't built to work well in a cloud environment. And your UCaaS has been. And so you've got all of these different, you're going to pick the applications not to suit the WAN fabric, right? You're going to pick the applications to suit the business. After you're done doing that, after a business is done doing that right now, if they just simply let the business need lead them down the application path, and that's the right way, they're going to end up with applications that live in multiple places, many, many places, right? Different clouds, different cloud platforms, different SaaS platforms. And when that happens, again, let's go back to the very first question, which was, what was the big epiphany? And it was that complexity moved to the number one challenge of IT leaders. Right. So I think as you go down this path of these multi-cloud environments, multi-SaaS platform environments, you're going to need a cloud optimized infrastructure that very fluidly stitches all that together, right? And that you can manage from one dashboard. So I think you just, do your homework, vet your different SD-WAN solutions. The solution's going to be an SD-WAN one. Whether it's Aryaka or someone else, we'd love for it to be Aryaka, but do your homework on those different SD-WAN platforms. And then before you buy it, test a couple, right? Put a few of them into POC and kick the tires, because there's nothing quite like using something, right? To find out, we all give good PowerPoint. That's what I like to say.
All right, Olen Scott, thank you very much for your time today. Really enjoyed looking at your market research report. I know that you're looking at a couple of different things. Part of it is planning out your strategy. Part of it is market research. I thought it was a fascinating report and replete with all kinds of great data. So for everybody listening out there that has an application or anything that gets driven on top of a network, by all means, jump in and take a look at that. So that URL, one more time, Olen, please.
It's www.aryaka.com.
And when you get to the Aryaka website, search for SOTW for State of the WAN. Again, sir, thank you very much for joining us today. Great interview, great reports, and we will look forward to talking to you again soon.
Ken, it was my pleasure. Thanks so much. Have a great one.
You've been listening to Avant Technology Insights, featuring information and opinions on how key technologies can be leveraged to solve business problems. Avant Technology Insights is a service of Avant Communications, a platform for IT decision-making. All opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the guests and the host. For more information, please feel free to download our research reports and other resources at www.goavant.net. That's www.goavant, as in victory, ant.net. For Avant Research and Analytics, this is Ken Presti.